Today I've got a good group of friends, some new friends actually. Most of you guys I've met within the last year and a half, and so we are all here in Calgary, and so we are here. Actually, we're sitting in order of when we moved here, and so. But each of these guys are going to share a little bit about their story. But I want you class to just kind of hear another example of churches who are multiplying, who are reproducing more churches. That's the phase we're in this week. We're in the expanding phase, or reproducing phase, and we're talking about early on establishing a multiplication culture and then doing that. And so we have a great example today of a group of guys here in South Calgary who have done that. And so I want to introduce Bo Neal, who's pastor of Southwinds Church in Cranston, and Pastor Brett Myers here, the good-looking stud in the almost middle. And he's a pastor of, I'm going to say the new church name, is that fine? Okay, the Junction Church, that is in Mahogany, which is a community in the southeast quadrant. And then the guy who was just beating me up here by a month, Chris Flora, we went through assessment together and have done some of our trips here together, and he'll be planting Multiply Church in the Silverado community, which is also in the, I think it's southeast quadrant as well. So southwest. Okay, so you jumped a quadrant.
Yeah,
you jumped
just across the river.
Yeah, not too far.
That's right.
So I'm in the north side of the city, and so my task is to do what these guys have done in 8 years to do in 8 months. So that's a complete joke. But anyways, these guys are going to share a little bit about their story and how they have been multiplying churches here in South Calgary. So, but why don't you start us off, because I know that you were part of the very first church plant out of Trinity Baptist Church here in South Calgary. So share us a little bit about what that looked like, and really what I really want students to hear is just how the heart of multiplication for you guys at Trinity started that has led to Chris. Sure. And even beyond. So share a little bit about that story with us.
You bet. We were growing as a church at Trinity Baptist Church, and Dr. Rob Blackaby, who's the president of the Canadian Southern Baptist Seminary now, he was the pastor of that church, and it started actually in an elders retreat. They got together every year, got away, and just prayed for a couple days together and sought God's direction and will for the church, and the church was multiplying. The church was, we were baptizing people. We had just kind of restarted a college and career ministry that was just booming, and the youth were doing great, and Trinity was full. And so they were asking God, what do we do next? And it was actually a book that Reggie McNeil wrote called This Present Future. That he asked 6 questions, and even I think Rob would even say today, we talked to him the other day about this, he's like, I don't know if that book would be, God used that book for that time. And because they were asking God what next, and God really pricked the heart of the elders and pastors of Trinity to say, I don't want you just to sell your building and go build somewhere outside the city where you can grow, because they were landlocked. I don't want you to do that, and I don't want you to just stay here and go to multiple services. I want you to do both. So I want you to stay here and own the community that I've given you, and I want to send you out to where the city is going, because at that time we were growing at about 100 people a day, a little over 100 people a day in the city. The economy was booming, people were moving from all over the world, and God was moving. And so we said, okay, yes, Lord, and we were about 180 people at that point, between 180 and 200 people, and God, he kept speaking, as he often does. And he said, I don't want you just to plant one church. I want you to start a church planting network in the southeast of Calgary. And we thought, Lord, how is a church of 180 people going to start 10 churches? How are we going to do that? And that's when God just said, first you trust me, and then I'll show you. And so we said, okay. And so we started to get the launch team together for Southwinds Church. We prayed, we prayer walked these communities. God formed a launch team, and he brought along our first partner church at Taylor's First Baptist Church in South Carolina. And then he brought another partner church, another partner church, another partner church, of churches that were thousands of miles away, that he was already stirring in their hearts to join church planting. And they'd never been to Calgary. They had heard of Calgary, but God was already stirring in their hearts as he was stirring in our hearts, and then he brought us together. And there is over and over and over again, we saw relationships formed that we couldn't explain outside of this is what God was doing. And so we stepped out in faith, and 10 years ago, this coming September, we launched Southwinds Church. and we began to pray over the communities, reach out into the communities, do block parties and camps and those kind of things, because we believe God said the church needs to be at the center of community, because people here in our city, they had been moving here, leaving all their support networks. So grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles and cousins were all somewhere else. And people here, they were making a lot of money, but they were lonely. They lived 8 feet from each other, but they're lonely. And so God showed us that that's one of the biggest needs for people was community. And the church is the only place you can experience true community.
So you guys, and you were an associate pastor role at that time with Rob, correct?
That would have been great. I was an intern.
Okay.
You were part of the.
That's right.
It's okay. I was an intern.
I was an intern for several years with Trinity while I was going to seminary.
Okay.
I went to the Canadian Southwinds Seminary, and I was interning still when I joined the launch team. So I got to get my feet wet in ministry with Dr. Blackaby and the associate pastor, who was actually his brother, Peter Blackaby.
Okay. Yeah.
And
so
so
yeah, two really good mentors.
absolutely,
And then,
great mentors.
now, how many years into the plant did you take over as the lead pastor?
As the lead, now I got to do, since Rob, right before we launched, he began 6 months before we launched. He took the role as president of the seminary and transitioned out of Trinity, but he was also the interim for Trinity, and he was the lead planter for Southwinds.
Wow.
And so myself and another seminary student got lots of opportunity to get good ministry experience.
Yeah.
But I took the reins as lead pastor of Southwinds Church in October of 2009. So it was just over 2 years.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
And so, as you hear, embedded in the story is they had a desire to multiply. And so, so let's kind of go to the next church plant. So, why don't you kind of start with, okay, so you planted Southwinds Church in Cranston, and then you started thinking, well, we need to plant another. So take us into that, and then Brett, you kind of finish up that piece of the story.
I'll bridge to Brett here, the stud in the middle.
Oh man,
you know,
we're desperate.
We had a timeline that we set out with that we were going to launch in 2007 Southwinds Church, and then in 2 years we'd launch another one, and then in 2 years we'd launch another one, and then in 2 years after that, then we would launch two at once, because we'd have more churches working together. Because we wanted every church we launched, we wanted to work together to launch that next church. And so we launched Southwinds Church, and then 2 years came, and we started to get a core group together with another seminary student that had come along on this launch team at the same time. But you know what, Dustin, by God's grace, that church plant didn't go. That launch team didn't make. We had some pretty good momentum going, but then some stuff happened, as can anywhere. And just tragic, sad circumstances happen in the life of a church planter or family. And again, by God's grace, before that launch team ever got up and going, before that church ever got up and going, it was kind of dead in the water. And so we just went back to, okay, God, we're going to keep doing what you told us to do. And we kept reaching out in the community. We kept casting the vision. We're a church that's going to plant churches. And then 3 years after that, a really good, who ended up being a really, really good friend of mine, somebody that I met years before that at North American Mission Board. His name was Brett Myers. He was pastoring a church in South Carolina, and they were looking for a place to go do a mission trip. And I'll let Brett fill you in on that, but man, just God showed us. It took 2 years, but God showed us who that church planter was going to be. So I'll let Brett pick up with that.
Yeah. So they had been not just reaching out to their community, but in the communities around them, and doing camps in communities around them. And Mahogany was one of those communities, 2 communities over from Cranston. And they'd done a basketball camp, right, for a year or two, a couple of years. And first year I came up on a mission trip, I didn't work in Mahogany. I worked in Auburn Bay and Cranston, but they had done a basketball camp in Mahogany, I think, that year.
Yeah.
And so they started building a relationship in that community and other communities around them. And we came up first year 2012, did soccer camp, second year to do T-ball camp 2013. And between those 2 years, it was actually the trip up here that God really broke me. I was serving in a fairly churched area, and God really broke me over the need for churches and over the losses. And just family after family after family, and even family nephews that had come to a Christian sports camp that I met that were not involved in the church, not Christian, I didn't know much about Christ at all, and if at all. And so God really had begun breaking between those 2 years after the first year that I came up here. And so we started feeling like God was leading us to plant and didn't know where, and started praying through where. And there are a lot of barriers to, to come into Calgary, and especially financially. And so at first, honestly, I said, no, not Calgary. My wife thought maybe Calgary. We started looking elsewhere, kind of easier places financially for us to go. And by the second year we came up here in 2013 on a mission trip, it was really that trip that God nailed down. This is why I'm giving you a love for Calgary. It's not just come once a year, it's to come here, to move here. And so our family came back up. Well, I talked to Bo on that trip, and I said, we sat down to coffee on Thursday morning, one of the last couple of days of the trip, and I told Bo, I said, I don't know what God's doing, but I think he might be leading us to Calgary to start a church. And I had mentioned that earlier in the week that he was leading us to start a church, I thought. And we were praying through where. And he said, we just got basically an invitation from the Homeowners Association manager in Mojave to start a church in Mojave. He said that was 3 weeks before that, and they've been praying for a few weeks, their leadership team, about, God, send us a church planter. This is of you, then send us someone. It's kind of, that coffee was like, whoa, that's weird. It's, my wife and I and our kids came back up at September 2013, and my wife was gung ho when I called her on that trip and said, I think I might be to Calgary. Her response was, yeah, I know. And so, just waiting on you to catch on. And so we came up September and God nailed it down for us and met the leadership team and had a good conversation with them, and went back and told our church in October, and they were moving to Calgary, and started talking to partners and trying to raise partnerships. And so we came out and launched June 2015, and so we're coming up on 2 years old now, and launched in June, right at the beginning of that summer, and had just started with some Bible studies in our home before that, and kind of missional communities type stuff, and just really trying to permeate the community with the gospel and start life groups, and kind of drew a lot of our core team from there. Got a family coming with us from Southwinds, and it's been exciting. We started praying then. It was around the time we launched, I guess, right? What's next? Yeah. So where are we going next?
So basically, Southwinds Cranston launched in 2007 or 9?
2007.
So 2007. In 2015, you guys launched. And so it's kind of starting to see, because I'm not sure when Trinity started as a church. I'm sure it's long, good bit ago. But as you see, the cool thing is the timeline for multiplication is slimming down as momentum is happening. Yes. So 2007, 2015, and that leads us into Chris here. Chris and I went through assessment together, so we know each other. We had to go through the fire of assessment together through the North American Mission Board, and we survived. But I think it's because we held hands and you took on the other guys in the octagon and knocked them out for me. That's right. We have a UFC joke going with Chris. I won't share that on camera. But so Southwinds Church in Cranston started 2007. Southwinds Church Mahogany, which is now changing its name to the Junction Church, and then as you just mentioned, you were there was an invitation from a community center, basically for Southwinds to plant another church. So how did that bridge into Silverado?
Yeah, so
that kind of transitioned into Chris's a little bit. Yeah.
So we'd started working in Silverado. They had worked in Silverado years back, but then we not done anything for a couple of years there, I think. And so we started working together over in Silverado, doing block parties and stuff like that. There's one block party in particular. We brought in a petting zoo and inflatables and all kinds of stuff. Big summer block party, and we had people just the entire event coming up saying, "We got to start a church in our community. We need a church over here." And some, I think, were believers, and some were not. Some of the people that we talked to, and in that block party, God started giving us a good relationship with community leadership over there as well, and seemed to be kind of a theme. And so we came out of that thinking, maybe this is the community. And so we started praying. Their leadership team and our launch team started praying. All right, God, is this a community? And if so, then help us identify the church planter, whether that's internal or external or whatever. And then I got a call from Chris, and I knew each other from seminary. And, we had gone to seminary at Southern a while back, and got a call from Chris one day.
Yeah. So take it away. All right. So never thought I would be planting a church. Never really even prepared for it or dreamed of it. Like, just thought I'd be leading an established church. That's where I thought my skill set was, and education and experience. That's what I grew up in. So I just kind of thought, hey, I want to lead a church that plants churches. That's kind of my life goal. So, they launched in June, and then that October of 2015, I went down to Birmingham for a training for World Changers that I ran in Cleveland, Ohio, and I was just outside Columbus, Ohio at the time. And on that plane ride back, right before that, I met a guy named Stan, who's the church planting catalyst in Edmonton. So Stan sits down
Which
with
is
me.
3 hours north of Calgary,
Yeah.
same province.
That's right. Yep. So sat next to him on the shuttle ride back to the airport. Never met the guy. I mean, there's hundreds of people with this coordinator training. Sat next to him, introduced myself. He said, "Hey, I'd like to ask young guys in ministry this question." I'm like, "Yes, I got gray hair, but I'm young." He said, what is it you want to do the next 30 years? What do you want to be associated with? I said, I've known that since I sat in a church planting class with Brett. Since 2006, I've wanted to lead a church that plants churches. Like, I've known that. And he said, have you ever planted a church before? I said, nope, student ministry, man. That's where I've been the last decade. He said, do you think it might be hard to lead a church to plant churches if you've never planted? I said, again, still in student ministry. He's like, well, let me tell you about what's going on in Edmonton. I'm going, oh, that's nice. Here's this dude wearing, got his suspenders on, a little bit of a Western look, and like, you don't fit the Ohio vibe. Like, it just, I'm going, all right, he's planting churches in Edmonton. And then he said, I also do some work in Calgary. And the second he said Calgary, it was almost like a bucket of gas being poured on a flame inside, like bells and whistles going off, and I'm going, what? Like, what do you want? And so he's telling me about Calgary and the work that God's doing there. And I said, hey, do you know my buddy Brett? He just started a church there. He said, oh yeah, I know Brett. And so we just kind of kept talking, but I didn't hear a whole lot of what he said about Calgary, because literally it was just like this, God was just trying to impress on me that, hey, this is where I want you. And I just blindsided by it. And so I go home, and so I've been gone for 3 days. I tell my wife about the conversation with Stan, and when we finish, he's like, you need to give your buddy Brett a call. I was like, okay, I'll call Brett. No problem. So I tell my wife about it, and then we go to bed. And so it's Saturday night, church the next morning, all that stuff. And we would normally read, so I turn out my light, roll over. She's not reading, she's just crying. And I'm going, oh man, I've been gone for 3 days. I came home with oatmeal cream pies, so I know I didn't do anything this time. Like, it's not me. I'm innocent. And I said, what's going on? She said, the way you talked about Calgary, it's like you've already made up your mind that we're moving there. And I was like, whoa, time out. Like, nobody said anything about moving anywhere, nothing. No, slow down. And she said, but there's something there. We need to figure this out. And so Monday, 2 days later, I called Brett and said, hey, I met this guy named Stan. And that turned into a very long conversation that took up like half of his day. Like a very long conversation about what it would take to move here, what it would take to plant here, all those things that go into it, what would make a successful church planter here. It was almost like a mini assessment, I think. Were you assessing me? He was assessing me.
I was once told by a very wise person that everything is a test.
That's right.
Yes. I think I got it from a movie. Anyways, everything's a test.
Oh, yeah. So we took some time to pray, and this is all in October of 2015.
Which is actually the same month that I made my very first trip here as well.
Yeah.
2015. So I was having coffee with these two guys while your wife was crying.
Yeah.
God knows it. Jill may have been crying too.
So we, a few weeks later, I called Bob Shelton, who's the Sin City missionary here in Calgary, and he also oversees Edmonton. He said, well, that's a great story. Seems like God might be at work, but let's test this out. You need to come on a vision trip with your wife. And he said, I want you to fundraise it. That's going to tell us, A, do people believe in you enough to invest in this venture? And B, can you ask for money? Because if you move here, you're going to need to be able to fundraise.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So we had that conversation like on a Thursday or Friday. Sunday morning, I walk into my church office, and literally on my desk is 5 $100 bills with a sticky note on top that says, "Use as the Lord leads, no strings attached." I'm going, plane ticket.
let me, about 500 is about a plane ticket.
Yeah.
For us, it'd be doing about 450. So,
Yep. So, I sent a few Facebook messages to some friends because I didn't want to tell anybody in my church and like commit career suicide or something.
Right.
And so a few Facebook messages, and I called Bob back on Wednesday. So like it hasn't even been a week since we talked, and I said, I think I've got about double the amount I need to fund the vision trip. And he said, that was fast. I said, yeah, God provides.
Yeah.
And but we waited until the end of January. We came up at the same time you guys did.
Yep.
And
that's the first time that my wife Jill came and our son Kirk. He was I think about 7 months old.
Yeah, he's in a baby carrier.
He was.
Not anymore.
No, he's carrying his own baby carrier around.
But so we sat down in downtown Calgary with the guys and just dreamed about the future. And I mean, from that point on, then we did the assessment in April, and never saw myself as a fundraiser. Was quite intimidated about asking people for money. I have no issue with it now. I'll ask anybody for money, but
it humbles you for sure.
It does. But when you start looking at the numbers of what it takes to live in a city that's just more expensive than any place I've ever lived in my life, on top of the fact that I can't work in country until I'm a permanent resident, which is going to take a few years. Saying how do we fundraise that? I've got 4 kids. Like, how does this work? What does this even look like? And literally, God He's still providing. Yeah. And there's been networks and relationships, kind of going back to what Bo said earlier. There's been things that have happened that if I had sat down a decade ago and tried to orchestrate all these little steps, I couldn't have even dreamed of the possibilities. So God's just been in the middle of it. So, occasionally you have those days, and you guys have been there too, where it's like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? You just go back to, okay, God, you did this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and you did big things and little things, and there's still things that are playing out where I go back and say, oh, that's what the point of that was in my life 7 years ago. It was for today. And so all these things are connecting. And, even for my dream, that's over 10 years old now, to lead a church that plants churches, to be able to jump into a city in a new country with guys like these two that are already here. I've got a support network that most church planters don't have. Right. And I've got experience and wisdom to pull off of. Mm-hmm. And the blessing that's there is it helps us launch faster. Right. So we're going to launch faster and further than we would alone, which means we're going to plant more churches faster, and they're going to go further. So we want, we talk about this all the time, like the statistics now, Calgary is 95% lost, no relationship with Christ. What's it look like 20 years from now? What if that number is 80 or 75? Like, it's possible. Like, that dream is becoming a reality because you see that speed up between plant to plant. Right. We're already saying, where's the next church plant? And we haven't even launched yet. And we're already looking at it saying, where's the next one? How do we formulate this network so that we launch churches faster? Healthy churches, good churches.
You guys are basically planning to launch February 2018, so here in about, 8-9 months, no pressure. So you see the progression, so you got 2007, 2015, 2018, and if you're already looking now, 2019 is not that far off. And so, and the cool thing about these guys' story, which I love so much, and I don't know if I've actually shared this with you guys, but it was hearing their story and what they were looking to do, how God was leading, was actually one of the biggest affirmations that Calgary was our city. And I think if I would not have met you guys, because you were exploring as I was going, but I met them before I even met you in October of 2015, and I sat down with coffee with the guy who brought me up, Mark Gilbert, and it was your story of how you guys are already multiplying and already planning to work together and do things, and it was one of those confirmations for us, and so that was a really cool piece of our story, how you guys fit in. And so here's what you have is you have Trinity Baptist planted Southwinds, and Southwinds helped plant now the Junction Church. Now those 2 churches together are helping plant another, and then these 3 together will plant. So, but I want you to take just a minute maybe and say, because what's next? I know you mentioned there's you're trying to look for the next community, look for the next planter. So what's next for this network of churches here in the South?
That's exactly what's next. Is we are seeking God's face as a God. All right, now where do we go next? Because I think one of the themes that we have seen all along, and this is just the way God works, it's not special to our network, but one of the themes that God has just very, very much affirmed is, first you say yes, and then I'm going to show you.
Mm-hmm.
So first say yes. So, okay, God, we want to say yes. We want to say yes to the next one. And then we're going to trust that he showed us where we go. Because this working as 3 churches to plant 1 church, probably the last time that we're going to work together on one. Yep. Because the next step after that would be, all right, now we're going to plant 2. And again, that's our progression. We'll see what God wants to do. Maybe the next one's 2. Maybe the next, I don't know. But for you guys, is that fair enough with where we're going next?
Yeah.
And we also, another really important next step for this is now that God's put 3 churches in place, really, the one that's going to plant 2018 Multiplied Church, but is some framework to our network as well to say, okay, God, who do you say that we are? Yeah. And under this umbrella of CMBC Alberta, of Sin Calgary, who do you say that we are so that we can invite other church planters to come along and other churches to get on board with this?
Yeah. The really cool thing, what I really appreciate, you guys are really a good model for our city, because if we can replicate what you guys are doing on your section of town and 10 other places around the city, then we start seeing the 95 go down to 90 and 85 and so forth. It's going to take a multiplication. So there are so many lessons to be learned just from this great conversation. You heard the Holy Spirit guiding from the very beginning, from Trinity Baptist on through. You see God doing some really crazy things to get this going. Because that's what God does. We also saw that there was a cultural multiplication from the beginning. And that's why we talked very early on about developing that in yourself and then in your launch team and your core group and all those sort of things. But you also heard some very practical things about building community rapport. That's why we talked about it. The 4th, 5th week of class, we talked about building relationships in the community and becoming the place that people want to be a part of. And so you see 2 communities have asked them to plant church. So who knows if the next community is going to come up and say, hey, we want to see what's happening in your 3. Come bring it to our community. And that's what these guys are going after. So a lot of really cool lessons to learn here. And so, guys, thank you for sharing your story today. It's inspiring for me, and I hope that it helps our students too. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor.
Appreciate it.